Laura Kingsley had controlled every satisfying detail of her life for 15 years. Her schedule, her staff, her reputation, even her emotions. So when the quarterly conference call ran 20 minutes over, she didn't panic. She recalculated. Her fingers drummed against the leather steering wheel of her BMW as she navigated the winding mountain road, the GPS indicating another hour and 40 minutes to Denver. The board needed her signature by 9 tomorrow morning. The preliminary review was promised by midnight tonight. Her driver had taken personal leave, some family emergency she'd approved without reading the details, so she'd driven herself to the leadership retreat in Pinewood Summit. 3 hours of motivational speakers and team-building exercises she privately considered theater. Results were what mattered. Everything else was decoration. The October sky had been crystalline blue when she'd left the resort town. Colorado postcard weather. But over the past 40 minutes, clouds had gathered with unsettling speed, transforming the afternoon into something gray and threatening. Laura noticed but didn't slow down. Weather was simply another variable to manage, like traffic or incompetent staff. Her phone rang through the speakers. She answered without checking the screen. Kingsley. The voice on the other end belonged to Rivera from building operations, hesitant, almost apologetic. He explained that the Martinez contract files she'd requested were ready, but someone named Marcus Brooks had flagged discrepancies in the facility budget, a $15,000 gap between vendor-reported hours and actual maintenance logs. To who? Marcus Brooks, ma'am, the maintenance supervisor at the downtown property. He noticed inconsistencies processing vendor invoices and thought you should know. Email me the details. I'll review when I'm back. Her tone closed the conversation like a door swung shut. She'd been CEO of Kingsley Properties for 7 years, building the company her father founded into a portfolio worth over $200 million. She didn't have time for maintenance supervisors with opinions about budget math. The man had crossed her path 4 times in 6 months. She couldn't recall a single instance. She ended the call just as the first snowflake hit her windshield. Within minutes, the sky opened. Snow fell with an intensity that seemed impossible for October. Wipers on, headlights on, jaw tight. Visibility dropped from clear to obscured in the span of a single curve. The GPS recalculated, adding 15 minutes, then 20. Then the route ahead went blank entirely, the map unable to load without data. The car hit a patch of black ice she never saw. The BMW's rear end swung out with sickening force. Laura's heart lurched as she overcorrected, felt the vehicle sliding sideways toward the guardrail. Training took over. She turned into the skid, eased off the brake, kept her movement small. The car fishtailed once more, then came to rest at an angle across the right lane. Front bumper inches from the metal barrier separating asphalt from a 200-foot drop. She sat frozen. Her breath came short and fast. Her fingers had gone white on the wheel. In the silence, she could hear her own heartbeat. How frightened and foreign. A sound that seemed to belong to someone else entirely. No cell signal. No GPS. No one to call. For the first time in years, Laura Kingsley had no staff to handle the inconvenience, no assistant to delegate the crisis to. She was alone, and the realization settled over her like the cold already seeping through the car's expensive insulation. A weathered sign appeared through the white curtain. Cedar Ridge Lodge, 2 miles. She didn't hesitate. The lodge materialized suddenly through the storm. A sprawling timber structure, warm light glowing from several windows, smoke rising from a stone chimney. Laura had never been so relieved to see another building in her life. She parked close to the entrance, grabbed her briefcase and overnight bag, and ran for the door. Her designer heels slipped twice on snow-covered steps. Inside, warmth. A lobby of exposed beams and riverstone, fire crackling in an enormous hearth. Margaret, the manager, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and weathered hands, hurried around the reception desk. "Good Lord, you look half frozen. Come in, honey." Laura set down her bags, trying to control her shivering. She needed a room, just for the night. Margaret's expression turned sympathetic as she explained the situation. The highway patrol had closed Route 40 in both directions. A once-in-a-decade storm system from Canada, faster than anyone predicted. 2 feet expected by morning. The lodge had its own generator, one of the only places with power for 20 miles. No Wi-Fi, no cell tower, landline local only. Long-distance lines down. Laura pulled out her black Amex. She'd pay triple for a room. "It's not about money, dear. We only have one room left, and someone else arrived just before you." Margaret's eyes shifted to something behind Laura. "Marcus, could you come here a moment?" Laura turned, already preparing her most authoritative tone, the one that made board members reconsider and vendors lower their prices. The words died before they formed. Marcus Brooks stood near the fireplace, brushing snow from a worn winter jacket. He was tall, maybe 6'1", with dark skin, close-cropped hair graying at the temples, and the kind of weathered features that came from actual labor rather than expensive skincare. Jeans, work boots, flannel under a practical coat. The complete inverse of the tailored suits populating Laura's world. Recognition crossed his face. Hers stayed blank. "My Miss Kingsley?" Her mind raced to place him. Someone from the office, a vendor, a contractor who'd come through for a building inspection. Marcus saw the confusion, and something flickered across his expression. Not hurt, exactly. Something quieter. The resigned acknowledgement of someone accustomed to being looked through. "Marcus Brooks, maintenance supervisor at your downtown property. We've met 4 times. The pieces connected. The man Rivera had mentioned on the phone. The one who'd flagged the $15,000 discrepancy she'd been too busy to consider. She'd passed him in hallways dozens of times without registering his face, the way she didn't register any support staff unless something broke. Of course. They both knew it was a lie. "What are you doing here?" "Same as her," he explained. "Caught in the storm. I'm heading back from visiting his daughter at a grief camp 20 miles north. Maya, 7 years old. Second year attending a week-long program for children who'd lost a parent. His wife Sarah had died 3 years ago. Breast cancer that metastasized before anyone caught it." Margaret explained the one-room situation. 2 queen beds, shared bathroom, their largest room. "No." Laura's refusal was immediate. "I got here first," Marcus said, his voice level but carrying steel underneath. "And even if the room were for sale, I'm not interested in selling it to someone who doesn't remember meeting me 4 times in 6 months." The accuracy hit harder than she expected. Heat rose to her cheeks, but she held her ground. "This is a business emergency. I have obligations. And I have a 7-year-old daughter who expects me to pick her up from camp tomorrow at 9. That's non-negotiable." They stared at each other. Margaret wrung her hands, mentioned the common area couches, extra blankets. Laura grabbed her bags, said she'd take the couch. Marcus stopped her. "That doesn't seem right. You take the room." The unexpected gesture caught her off guard. She paused. Something about the exhaustion lining his face, the mention of his daughter, the quiet recognition that she'd been rude to someone who'd done nothing wrong. The room has 2 beds, 2 queens, separate sleeping areas. Laura looked at Marcus. He looked back, expression unreadable. I can keep professional boundaries if you can. A muscle moved in his jaw. I've been keeping professional boundaries with you for 6 months, Miss Kingsley. I think I can manage one more night. Room 12. Top of the stairs, end of the hallway. Heavy timber door. The fireplace matched the one downstairs, and windows showed nothing but white. Laura took the bed nearest the window. Marcus entered carrying a worn duffel and a small backpack, set them on the opposite bed with careful precision. The silence between them was heavy and awkward until Laura broke it. The budget discrepancies Rivera mentioned, the Henderson property HVAC contract. What exactly did you find? Marcus hung his coat. Numbers didn't add up between what the vendor billed and the actual hours worked. $15,200. He'd cross-referenced part code FP2847 against the maintenance log. In the vendor reported 340 labor hours. His calculations showed 187. Laura's attention sharpened. 15,000 was worth investigating. You documented everything? Sent it to Rivera this afternoon. He was supposed to forward it to you. What Marcus didn't know, what neither of them could have known with the cell towers down and the world buried in white, was that the email had never reached Laura's inbox. In Denver, in a corner office on the executive floor, Victor Harrington, the company's CFO of 23 years, a man Laura's father had hired before she'd graduated high school, had intercepted Rivera's forward, read its contents, and deleted it from the server within 11 minutes of its arrival. Victor closed his laptop and stared at the darkened Denver skyline. 23 years he'd given this company. He'd been there when the founder poured the first foundation. He'd built the financial architecture that turned one apartment building in Queens into a $200 million empire. And now the founder's daughter sat in the chair that should have been his, and a maintenance worker in the basement was pulling threads that could unravel everything. He picked up his phone. His voice was steady and cold. The maintenance supervisor at the downtown property, Brooks. He's asking questions about Martinez Corp invoices. I want a termination file started. Performance issues. Have it ready by Monday. Back at the lodge, the wind climbed to a howl. The lights flickered once, twice, then dimmed to something fragile. Margaret appeared in the dining room doorway, warning everyone to stay inside. Visibility near 0, temperature dropping fast. Marcus stood. Do you need help with the generator? I know heating systems. Margaret smiled and declined. Their caretaker had it handled. Laura watched him offer help to a stranger with the same quiet competence he'd used to flag a $15,000 fraud. She thought about the people she passed every day without seeing, the names she never learned, the lives she'd reduced to functions. And for the first time, a hairline fracture appeared in the architecture of certainty she'd spent 15 years constructing. The lights went out. Darkness swallowed the room. Only the fire remained, its glow suddenly fragile against the vast cold pressing in from every direction. Laura's phone was dead. Her laptop had 17% battery and no connection to anything. And the storm had stripped away every tool she'd ever relied on. Somewhere in Denver, Victor Harrington was building a case to destroy the only man who'd noticed the truth. And Marcus Brooks sat calmly in the firelight, adding a log to the flames, unaware that by Monday morning, his job, his income, and the fragile stability he'd built for his daughter would all be targeted for elimination. But tonight, the storm had other plans. And what would happen in this room before dawn would change both their lives in ways neither the CEO nor the maintenance supervisor could yet imagine. Laura woke to a cold so absolute it felt like drowning. Her body had locked rigid, muscles clenched in a desperate attempt to generate warmth that no longer existed. The fire had died to embers sometime in the darkness, leaving only a faint orange pulse against the freezing air filling the room. She tried to move and couldn't, tried to speak and produced nothing but a thin whisper that dissolved before it reached the other bed. Then Marcus was there. His flashlight cut across her face, and the sharp breath he drew told her everything about how she looked. His hand touched her cheek and pulled back. "You're going into hypothermia. I need to raise your core temperature fast. Body heat is the most effective method." His voice carried no hesitation, no awkwardness. The voice of someone who had handled emergencies before and understood that embarrassment was a luxury the cold didn't permit. "Is that okay?" Laura managed a nod, the only permission she could give with a jaw too stiff to open. Marcus rebuilt the fire first, kindling, then larger logs, a coaxing flame with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd grown up in Montana winters and lost a friend to frozen water at 19. A boy who fell through lake ice during a fishing trip and never came back. Marcus had learned everything he could about cold after that. Carried the knowledge like a scar that served a purpose. He lifted her from the bed as easily as if she weighed nothing, transferred her to his mattress closer to the hearth, piled every blanket from both beds on top. Then he climbed in behind her, chest to back, arms wrapping around her middle. Even through layers of clothing and quilts, his warmth felt impossible, almost sacred. Focus on breathing. Slow, steady. You're going to be fine. Minutes or hours. Laura lost all measurement. The shivering intensified, then gradually eased. Sensation returned to her fingers first, painful pins and needles that made her gasp. That's circulation coming back. It hurts, but it means your body's fighting. When her voice finally returned, rough and foreign, the first thing she said surprised them both. "I built this entire life around never needing anyone, and I can't even survive a night without help." Marcus didn't respond immediately. His breathing remained steady against her back, his arms a constant anchor. When he spoke, the words were simple and carried no judgment. "Being human isn't a design flaw, Laura. It's the whole point." Something cracked open in her chest. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just a hairline fracture widening into a gap that let cold truth rush in alongside returning warmth. She had spent 38 years constructing an identity built on self-sufficiency, and it had taken a single night without electricity to reveal the foundation was hollow. Dawn arrived gray and slow. Marcus hadn't slept. He'd tended the fire through every dark hour, adding wood with careful timing, monitoring Laura's breathing, keeping vigil the way he probably kept vigil during Sarah's final months. Laura lay still, aware of his exhaustion, aware of the debt she owed him, aware that gratitude was an emotion she had almost no practice expressing. "Tell me about your daughter." Marcus's voice softened in a way that restructured his entire face. Maya was 7 going on 40. Serious, deeply thoughtful, obsessed with space, particularly Mars. Wanted to be an astronaut. Read through the Percy Jackson series in a single week. After Sarah died, Maya stopped wanting bedtime stories for almost a year. When she finally asked for a book again, Marcus had sat in the hallway outside her room and wept because it meant she was healing. Some mornings, she looks at me with Sarah's exact smile, and I forget for half a second that she's gone. Then I remember, and it's like the funeral all over again. Laura had no frame of reference for that kind of loss. Her parents were alive. Her relationships had been strategic. The deepest grief she'd experienced was losing a major acquisition to a competitor 3 years ago, and the comparison shamed her into silence. "What made you leave engineering?" "Maya made me leave engineering. After Sarah died, I couldn't do the travel. I couldn't focus on structural calculations when I had a 4-year-old who needed me home for dinner every night." He paused. "The maintenance job has reasonable hours and decent benefits. I don't love the work, but I love being her father, and the job makes that possible. That's not sacrifice. That's knowing what matters." Laura absorbed this. A man with an MIT degree in structural engineering, someone who designed buildings rated to withstand seismic events, was fixing HVAC units in her basement so he could pick up his daughter by 4:30, and she hadn't known his name. "I think I've been living my entire life in the wrong order," she heard herself say, "putting everything first and assuming life would wait. It doesn't wait, but it's not too late to rearrange." Margaret knocked at 7 with coffee and toast. Her eyes took in the single bed that had been used, the blankets piled together, the proximity of 2 people who'd entered this room as strangers. She said nothing beyond practical information. Storm moving out. Highway won't clear until afternoon. Landline working for local calls. Marcus went downstairs to phone the camp. Laura sat alone with her coffee, watching snow-heavy pines through the window, and felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Stillness. Not the manufactured calm of a controlled schedule, but genuine quiet. No emails demanding response, no board members requiring management. Just a woman in a borrowed fleece, alive because a man she'd overlooked had known how to keep a fire burning. Her phone powered on when she plugged it in. The screen exploded with notifications. 17 missed calls. The 34 urgent emails. A text from her father demanding explanation for the missed board meeting. Laura stared at the cascade of urgency and did something that would have been unthinkable 48 hours earlier. She set the phone face down on the nightstand and finished her coffee. They drove back to Denver separately that afternoon, the highway plowed but still treacherous. Laura didn't go to her office. She went to her penthouse, stood in the doorway looking at the designer furniture she'd never chosen, the art that cost more than most people's cars but meant nothing to her, the leather-bound books arranged by color that she'd never opened, a museum exhibit titled Successful Executives Living Space. She called her mother, not about business, not about the missed board meeting, just to talk. Catherine Kingsley, was startled by the unprecedented nature of the call, listened as her daughter described getting trapped in a storm and having time to think. "I realized I can't remember the last time I did something because I wanted to, not because it was expected or strategic." "Oh, sweetheart, I wondered when you'd hit this wall." Catherine told her about her own crisis of purpose at 40, how she'd started the charitable foundation against Laura's father's objections because it was the first thing in years that felt like hers. The conversation lasted 20 minutes, the longest non-business exchange they'd had in a decade. Monday morning, Laura walked the 4 blocks to Kingsley Properties headquarters instead of calling her driver. She noticed the security guard who greeted her by name, the barista who knew her order, and the janitorial staff that most executives pretended didn't exist. She reached the executive floor to find her assistant Jessica already in triage mode, tablet extended, crisis inventory ready. "Before we start," Laura's voice was quiet but carried an edge Jessica had never heard. "The email Marcus Brooks sent to Rivera on Friday about the Henderson HVAC discrepancies. Where is it?" Jessica checked again. The email existed in Rivera's sent folder but had been deleted from the routing queue before reaching Laura's inbox. The deletion had been performed from an executive-level account at 6:47 p.m. Friday evening, 11 minutes after Rivera forwarded it. "Whose account?" Jessica pulled the access log. Her face changed. "Victor Harrington's." Laura's jaw tightened. She told Jessica to pull every Martinez Corp invoice from the past 6 years, every HR complaint filed by maintenance or facilities staff, and every personnel action initiated by the CFO's office. She wanted it on her desk by noon, and she wanted Marcus Brooks in her office at 3. "He's a maintenance supervisor, Miss Kingsley. Wouldn't it be more appropriate to go through facilities management? He's the one who found it. Get him here." At noon, the picture that emerged was worse than Laura had imagined. Martinez Corp held contracts across 5 Kingsley properties. The billing pattern Marcus had identified at Henderson repeated everywhere, cross-referencing vendor-reported hours against maintenance logs and part codes revealed a cumulative discrepancy of $247,000 over 6 years. Or every contract had been approved by the same signature, Victor Harrington, but the financial fraud was only the surface. Buried in HR's digital archive, flagged as resolved but never actually investigated, sat 73 complaints spanning 6 years. Hostile work environment, discriminatory scheduling, retaliation for reporting safety violations, disproportionate discipline. The complaints came overwhelmingly from Black and Hispanic maintenance staff. 14 employees who'd filed formal reports had been terminated within 90 days of their complaints. The termination rate for complainants was 4.7 times the company average. Every termination had been processed through Victor's office. Laura read the 73 names, 73 people who had asked for help and been erased from the system. And Marcus Brooks, and the man who'd kept her alive through the coldest night of her life, appeared 3 times as the employee who'd flagged irregularities that nobody had followed up on. At 3 o'clock, Marcus entered the executive conference room in his gray maintenance uniform. Laura took the chair beside him rather than at the head of the table. $15,000 was the tip. The real number is $247,000 over 6 years, 73 buried complaints, 14 wrongful terminations. She turned her tablet so he could see the data. "And Victor Harrington deleted your email before it reached me. He's already started building a termination file against you. Performance issues, insubordination." Marcus studied the numbers without visible reaction. His eyes moved across spreadsheets and HR logs with the analytical precision of the engineer he'd been trained to be, connecting patterns that finance teams with 6-figure salaries had missed or chosen to ignore. "I need to be home by 4:30. Maya has a science project due Thursday." "Then let's make this count." What followed was the most productive hour Laura had experienced in months. Marcus walked her through operational reality, explaining gaps between corporate policy and daily practice, identifying exactly how Victor had exploited the disconnect between executive oversight and ground-level work. His analysis was systematic, specific, backed by part codes and labor logs and the accumulated knowledge of someone who'd spent 18 months watching a broken system from inside its walls. At 4:15, Marcus stood. One more thing." His voice carried weight. "This isn't just about money. Those 73 people trusted the system to protect them, and it didn't. Whatever happens next, that has to matter more than the dollar amount." He left to pick up his daughter. Laura sat alone in the glass-walled conference room, surrounded by evidence of institutional betrayal, and understood for the first time that running a company wasn't just about profit margins and board approval. It was about the 73 names on a list that should never have existed. Tuesday, Victor made his move. A termination notice appeared in HR's system for Marcus Brooks. Grounds: insubordination, unauthorized access to financial records. Effective Friday. Patricia Nolan, the HR director who'd processed the previous 14 terminations, had drafted the paperwork. But this time, Laura was watching. She froze the termination, locked Victor out of the HR system, and retained outside counsel. Rachel Chen, a corporate investigator with 20 years of experience and a reputation for dismantling exactly this kind of entrenched corruption. Wednesday afternoon, Maya Brooks stood in front of her second-grade class presenting her science project on Mars colonization. She'd spent 3 weeks building a model of Olympus Mons from papier-mâché, carefully painting the slopes rust red, labeling the elevation at 72,000 feet. A boy in the back row said it loud enough for the teacher to hear. His dad told him that Maya's father was just a janitor who cleaned toilets and didn't know anything about science. Maya didn't cry. She finished her presentation. She answered every question the teacher asked with precise, rehearsed accuracy. But when Marcus picked her up that afternoon, she was quiet in a way that alarmed him. They were halfway home before she spoke. "Daddy, why do people act like you're invisible?" Marcus pulled the car to the curb. He turned to face his daughter, this serious, brave child, with her mother's dark eyes and a gap-toothed smile that could reorganize his entire chest. "I'm an engineer, baby. I designed buildings that keep people safe in earthquakes. I took this job so I could be home with you every single night. That's not invisible. That's a choice. The most important one I ever made." Maya considered this with a gravity only 7-year-olds possess. Then she reached across the console and held his hand. That night, after Maya fell asleep clutching her library book about the Perseid meteor shower, Marcus sat at the kitchen table. The folder Laura had given him lay open. 73 names, 14 terminations, $247,000. And now his daughter, asking why the world treated her father like he didn't exist. He closed the folder, opened his laptop, began organizing every piece of evidence he'd gathered over 18 months into a presentation format he hadn't used since his engineering days. Precise, methodical, irrefutable. His phone buzzed at 11. Laura. "Rachel Chen finished the forensic audit. Victor has a shell company in Nevada. Harrington Consulting LLC, registered 2018. Every kickback routed through it. We have bank records." A long pause. Then Marcus, his voice carrying something heavier than anger. "Those 73 people, they weren't just ignored. They were punished for speaking. Their careers destroyed so one man could protect a $250,000 scheme. I know, and tomorrow morning, it ends." Marcus looked down the hallway toward Maya's room. Her nightlight cast a pale blue glow shaped like Saturn across the ceiling. He thought about every child who'd ever been told their parent was just something. Every worker who'd filed a complaint and been shown the door. Every name on that list who trusted a system designed to silence them. I'll be there at 9, but Laura, I need to leave by noon. Maya's science fair is Friday, and we still haven't finished the volcano model. I'll make sure we're done by 11. Marcus closed his laptop. The kitchen was quiet. On the refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like Jupiter, hung Maya's drawing of the two of them standing on Mars. She'd written underneath in careful second-grade handwriting, "Me and Daddy on Mars. He is the engineer. I am the astronaut." He touched the drawing once, then turned off the light. Tomorrow, a 23-year fraud would meet its end. But tonight, a father sat in a dark kitchen and made a promise to 73 strangers that their silence was over. 9 o'clock, Thursday morning. The executive conference room at Kingsley Properties occupied the northwest corner of the top floor, all glass walls and Italian leather, designed to intimidate anyone who entered without a title. 12 board members sat in their usual positions. Laura's father, Arthur Kingsley, I occupied the chair he'd claimed 30 years ago when the company was one apartment building in Queens and a dream he'd mortgaged his house to fund. Victor Harrington sat at the far end, fountain pen aligned parallel to his legal pad, radiating the quiet confidence of a man who believed 23 years of loyalty made him untouchable. Rachel Chen waited in the lobby with 2 federal investigators from the Department of Justice. They'd arrived separately, taken the service elevator, spoken to no one. Laura stood at the head of the table. She wore a charcoal suit, no jewelry except her watch, and an expression the board had never seen. Not the controlled authority of quarterly reviews. Something rawer. Something that had been forged in a powerless lodge on a frozen mountain and refined through 3 weeks of evidence that made her physically ill to read. Before we discuss quarterly projections, I need to present findings from an internal investigation initiated 3 weeks ago. Victor's pen stopped moving. A micro adjustment. Laura caught it. The first slide showed a side-by-side comparison. Martinez Corp. invoices reporting 340 labor hours at the Henderson property. Maintenance logs signed by Marcus Brooks documenting 187 actual hours. Part code FP2847 confirming the discrepancy through supply chain records that couldn't be altered retroactively. Our maintenance supervisor identified a $15,000 billing anomaly while processing routine invoices. He flagged it to operations, but the email was intercepted and deleted before it reached me. Laura advanced the slide. A server access log with Victor's credentials highlighted in red, timestamp 6:47 p.m. 3 Fridays ago. Deleted from an executive account 11 minutes after it was sent. Victor's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Around the table, 11 board members shifted in their chairs with the particular discomfort of people realizing they were about to witness something irreversible. The second slide expanded the scope. 5 properties, 6 years, 4,200 vendor-reported hours that never occurred. Total financial discrepancy, $247,000. Every contract bearing the same approval signature. Mr. Harrington, would you like to explain why a Nevada shell company called Harrington Consulting LLC, I'm registered in your name in 2018, received wire transfers from Martinez Corp. Totaling the exact amount of the overbilling? Victor stood. His face had drained of color, but his voice held steady, the practiced calm of a man who'd navigated corporate politics for over 2 decades. These allegations are fabricated. I've given 23 years to this company. I was here when your father poured the first foundation, Laura, before you graduated high school. Sit down, Victor. Laura's voice carried no volume and absolute authority. I'm not finished. The third slide hit the room like a change in air pressure. 73 internal complaints spanning 6 years. Hostile environment. Discriminatory scheduling. Retaliation. 14 employees terminated within 90 days of filing. A termination rate 4.7 times the company average, concentrated almost exclusively among Black and Hispanic maintenance staff. And at the bottom, dated Tuesday of this week, a termination order for Marcus Brooks. Grounds: insubordination and unauthorized access to financial systems. Initiated by Victor Harrington. Drafted by Patricia Nolan in HR. Targeting the employee whose only crime was noticing the truth. Laura pressed the intercom. The door opened. Marcus Brooks entered wearing a gray suit, white shirt, no tie. Simple, clean, chosen with the deliberate precision of a man who understood that dignity has never required expense. He carried a folder 4 inches thick and walked to the presentation screen with the unhurried confidence of someone who'd spent 18 months watching a corrupt system and 3 weeks organizing its autopsy. 11 board members stared at a man most of them had never seen before, despite the fact that he'd maintained the buildings generating their dividends for a year and a half. Every document in this folder is time-stamped, cross-referenced, and backed up across 3 independent locations. Marcus opened the presentation Laura had loaded for him. His voice was level, technical, stripped of emotion. The voice of an MIT-trained engineer presenting structural analysis, except the structure under examination was institutional corruption. The vendor fraud is quantifiable. $247,000. But 73 employees trusted this company's reporting system to protect them, and instead, it was weaponized to protect the person stealing from them. 14 people lost their jobs for telling the truth. That cost can't be measured in dollars. He turned to Victor. No anger in his expression, no satisfaction. Just the steady gaze of a man who decided that silence was no longer something he could afford. I'm one of those 73 names, Mr. Harrington. I filed reports 3 times. Each one disappeared. You built a termination file against me this week because I noticed what you'd been hiding for 6 years. Marcus closed the folder. But I'm still here, and so is the evidence. Victor looked around the table for an ally. 11 faces looked away. Arthur Kingsley stared at the financial data with the expression of a man watching his legacy fracture along lines he should have inspected years ago. Laura spoke the words she'd prepared at 3 a.m, sitting in her penthouse that no longer felt like a museum but like a place where a different kind of woman was learning to live. Victor Harrington, you are terminated effective immediately. Your access to all company systems has been revoked. Federal investigators are in the building. She pressed the intercom once more. Rachel Chen entered with 2 DOJ agents. These agents have questions regarding wire fraud, embezzlement, and civil rights violations under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983. Victor's pen rolled off the legal pad and clattered to the floor. No one picked it up. The weeks that followed restructured Kingsley Properties from the inside out. Victor Harrington was arrested at his home on federal charges, carrying a potential sentence of 12 to 15 years. Patricia Nolan resigned and cooperated with investigators in exchange for reduced exposure. Martinez Corp's offices in Colorado Springs were raided, revealing identical overbilling schemes at 4 other companies across the state. The DOJ expanded its investigation to a multi-district inquiry. Laura announced reforms before the board could suggest them. A compensation fund of $1.2 million for the 73 affected families. an independent complaint system operating outside internal HR reinstatement offers with full back pay for all 14 wrongfully terminated employees. Dan, a new vendor oversight protocol designed by Marcus Brooks, built on the operational knowledge that no executive in the building possessed because none of them had ever worked below the 12th floor. She offered Marcus the director of operations position, triple his current salary, corner office, executive parking. He considered it for exactly the amount of time it took to picture Maya's face at 4:30 when he walked through the door. I appreciate it, but I need to be home every day by 4:30. My daughter's science fair is next week, and her Mars volcano still needs a lava flow mechanism. Laura didn't argue. She proposed a consulting arrangement instead. Flexible hours, project-based. He'd set his own schedule. Marcus nodded. That I can do. It was, Laura reflected later, the first negotiation she'd ever conducted where both sides got exactly what mattered most. 1 year later, October again, Cedar Ridge Lodge. The porch overlooked a valley painted in autumn gold, aspens trembling in a wind that carried no threat. Margaret had welcomed them like family, produced cookies for Maya before the bags hit the floor, and assigned them room 12 without being asked. Maya sat cross-legged on the porch railing, eye pressed to the telescope Laura had given her for her 8th birthday, scanning the early evening sky for Jupiter's moons. Did you know Jupiter has 79 moons? 79! That's more than my whole class times 3. Laura wrapped both hands around her mug. I didn't know that, but I'm learning. Marcus sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. When he watched his daughter chart celestial bodies with the same focused intensity Sarah had brought to everything she'd loved, and felt the familiar ache that no longer threatened to pull him under. It lived in him now, like weather, some days heavier than others, always present, survivable. She asked me yesterday if you were going to marry us. His voice carried a quiet amusement. Her words, marry us, like it's a package deal. It is a package deal. That's the entire point. Maya turned from the telescope, gap-toothed grin catching the last copper light of sunset. Laura, if we lived on Mars, the years would be twice as long. So you and Daddy would have way more time for everything. I think we have exactly enough time right here. Marcus reached for Laura's hand. She took it. Between them, a stillness that had nothing to do with absence and everything to do with presence. The kind of quiet that only exists between people who've survived something together and chosen to keep building. On the refrigerator in their Denver kitchen, held by a magnet shaped like Saturn, Maya's newest drawing showed 3 figures standing on red soil. She'd labeled them carefully in 3rd grade handwriting: the engineer, the CEO, the astronaut. Underneath, in smaller letters, my family. Victor Harrington was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. 73 families received compensation totaling $1.2 million. 14 wrongfully terminated employees were reinstated with full back pay. The DOJ investigation expanded to 4 additional companies across Colorado. Marcus Brooks now consults for 3 Fortune 500 companies on operational integrity, on his own schedule. He has never missed a single pickup at 4:30. Maya Brooks won first place at her school science fair. Her project was titled Why Mars Needs Engineers. And every October, a family of 3 returns to a mountain lodge where a storm once trapped 2 strangers in the dark, and the cold taught them both what was worth holding on to: